All right, we've now got 20 minutes or so for questions for Professor Buxton. If people who've got questions could indicate your name, that might be helpful as well.
Yeah. Robert Reynolds. Look, thanks, Michael, for the very interesting talk. Look, I'm not sure where to begin, but look, just a couple of things. I joined this outfit, Victoria First, not to work out ways to better accommodate this huge influx that's forecast, but ways to try and thwart it, to diminish it at least. And I think that's an important point. But look, can I ask you, please, you mentioned the surge in growth in around the mid-50s and the early 70s, and another one now. Can you tell me, please, what were the prime, just briefly, what were the prime factors driving those early growth surges, mid-50s, which I remember my mother lamenting at the time, and the early 70s, and how it might differ from today's surge? My feeling that today's surge has got a lot to do with this new free market, laissez-faire type economic approach that's applying.
Well, Bob Burr was an expert on this. I should be Bob to answer it, because I'll have a dash. Look, post-war it was driven by a huge increase in immigration from overseas countries. But what we're seeing now is, and immigration rates have varied over time, and certainly the powerful driver at the moment. But what happens with population is, what's happening here in miniature compared to what's happening in other countries like China, for example. Once a population gets to a certain point, when it begins to reproduce itself, it's increasing itself from a bigger base. So that 1.5 million that Melbourne increased in population from 71 to 2011 was driven from a lower absolute base. But when we get to 2011, there's a bigger population, and so that's increasing. That's reproducing itself, and so you end up with bigger numbers, and then you add immigration and other factors, longer lifespans and so on. It all adds up to greater population pressures.
Question here. This is more of a comment than a question, but look, I blame both political parties.
Sorry, name?
Mike. Yeah, I blame both political parties for the current situation in the sense that neither party, in fact, for the Australian government, neither has been able to come up with a sustainable economic model which is not based on population growth. And until the party can come up with a sustainable economic model which isn't based on population growth, this situation is going to continue. Neither party seems to have the will to do it. And of course, business will always promote economic growth. There wouldn't be one capital industry in Australia probably would promote economic population growth at a bigger scale.
Yeah, that question was that neither party have come to grips with the pressures leading to the powerful interest leading to the population growth. Look, there's a massive, as you know, there's a massive growth industry in this country, in this city. It's driven by banks, by big retailers, by big development companies. It's an incredibly powerful network of interests, and they ruthlessly employ the pressure onto governments through peak industry and other groups, lobbyists, and their own powerful pressure. And they're in it for their own benefit. They're in it so they can lend more money to people to buy more houses and get more people in debt and so on. And governments respond to that with policies like negative gearing and so on, wasteful policies. I think the trick here is that governments have been able, because they've adopted this linear modernist view of everything's getting better progressively. It might only be a slight little line going up in a very slight way, but we're all getting richer and all getting better. We've seen in the United States that's not the case. Things are getting worse for most people in the United States. There's 50 million people on food stamps, there's 80 million working poor in the United States. This is a country with monumental divides in income. And this is happening here. But we've kind of been a bit insulated from this because we haven't had these extremes sort of visible, but they are going to become more visible. And so I think the trick here is that we've got to link the cost with the benefits. The benefits have been going to the proponents of the growth fetish, and they've been benefiting mightily. But the costs are being paid by others. So as an example, our urban developers do not pay the costs of their development. They get the benefits because landowners and developers are able to profit almost wholly from the increase in value of their land from developers. And when you look at the high-rise example in Melbourne, there is no betterment tax through development in this country and in this city. So if a developer gets a 20-storey development instead of a 4-storey development, the developer pockets the profit, the difference, without paying a betterment tax. It's an incentive for speculation. So what's happening is developers are buying a block at a value, say, for 4-storey development, and they're getting 8 or 9 stories. And then the next time somebody in that street is approached to sell a block, they're not selling it at a value of 4 stories, they're selling it at a value of, say, 12 stories. And then the developer will build 16 stories. So there's an incentive built into the whole system to profit through speculation. So what I think we have to do here is get governments to understand the nexus between the cost and the benefit. One group of people are benefiting without paying for the costs of their growth fetish, and everybody else is paying the costs. And those costs are paid in two ways, either out of our pockets. People in Ringwood and in the established suburbs of Melbourne keep contributing to the cost of developing out of urban areas, and we can't afford it. Governments are not paying for it. The people who live there are paying a different kind of cost. They're paying the cost of the lack of services, so it's a cost in quality of life. Now we have to get governments to understand that the costs and benefits have to be linked. So if the big banks and the big developers want to do this, they've got to meet the costs. At the moment, they're in nirvana. They're offloading the cost to the rest of us. So that's part of the problem of the growth fetish. But I do agree, we do need a different growth model, but part of that growth model is to come to terms with the costs and the benefits being sheeted over the people who are beneficiaries from it.
I'll take down the back.
Dennis, just a question. I've been giving a bit of thought why we have growth. If one looks at a list of countries on Wikipedia sorted by growth rates, at the very top of the list of countries which one wouldn't want to live in, and then you go down, maybe Singapore, then you get Australia. An economic powerhouse like Germany, for instance, have less than 1% growth. Sweden has very low growth rates. In fact, in all of Europe, I think there's only 2 cities which are larger than Melbourne. I'm not sure why we have to, just to echo the earlier comment, I'm not sure why we have to accommodate growth, since no other economic powerhouse relies on growth. So is it because the developers basically control the country, or is it perhaps what I'm thinking that our politicians and business leaders simply not competent enough to run the first world country, and this is simply the easiest way, the only way they know how to get some sort of growth, and it's just what they can do.
You should be up here.
One at a time. We might take this.
Well, just make a very quick comment on that. Look, you are right. One of the assignments I give our postgrad master's coursework students is to go and study a region or cities that are not growing, in fact might be declining, and to compare what's going on in these areas to Melbourne and ask why, right? It's exactly that point. Why is this happening? Melbourne, if you look at Europe, the United States, most people live in areas far less than the size of Melbourne. Melbourne, we tend to be kind of sort of dominated by this literature of mega cities. Mega cities, are certainly huge, there's no question about it. An increasing proportion of the world population is going to be in developing countries. But that's not Europe. And it's not most of the United States. There are mega urban regions in the United States, and they're probably going to join up in the current projections if they're allowed to continue to grow outwards, which is highly questionable. But most significant proportions of Central and Eastern Europe are actually declining in population, and huge number of towns and regional centres and cities in the United States are declining, and even though they might be growing outwards. So this is, Melbourne isn't necessarily the norm. It is in some areas, but it's not for lots of people. If you look at Germany, the reason Germany is like this is because it has economic policies that are pursued at a national level over bipartisan policies over decades, which are designed to ensure that investment capital goes into productive, often export-driven industries instead of property speculation. We don't do that. Now, why don't we do it? Because governments, I think, are terrified of altering the standard model that we've been talking about. They think that it's the only way to go. So we export huge amounts of coal to China, for example, thinking that if we don't, we're going to go under. Now, we're not going to go under at all, because other countries have shown, Scandinavian countries, Germany and other countries have shown that there is another way to do this, and it does work. But if you keep pouring money into incentives that lead to growth, and you are basically going to divert capital from productive enterprises into speculation. That's what we're doing, big time. And that is going to hurt us seriously. It's already beginning.
Or are we just creating a residential slum?
Yes. That's a big question, isn't it? I mean, I live in Collingwood, and we're just driving back through Collingwood today and just looking at the incredible amount of... I just said to my wife, you kind of see this all the time, but it doesn't actually hit you. But the incredible number of factories and large industrial and warehousing enterprises that used to be there, down to your tiniest little factories, and an unbelievable amount of employment that was there in traditional manufacturing and so on. That's all gone. Or mainly gone. And we're told all the jobs are in service jobs and advanced business service and planning, scientific, and some high manufacturing and so on. So governments, every time this point is put, governments point to how many new jobs in these sectors are being created. Now that doesn't mean to say that it's going to go on. High proportion of those jobs are not full-time, they're casual, they're contract jobs, and it's a very different model of employment than what I think we've all been used to. There's a huge debate about this, but yeah, I think it's a massive.
Mine's a statement question. One is that I believe protecting the Aussie backyard, and that the culture of all the different people who came to this country have embraced it, and it's to lose that is going to change completely. Firstly, secondly, where I live, the state government and other authorities are panicking, as I said right now. They want to build tunnels where I live, they're talking about running freight trains down the upfield line and all these sorts of things and other things. Trailers, having 3 trailer trucks instead of 2. The double Bs came back in the Labor government about 15, 20 years ago, and now they're talking about 3 trailers running. I see them as panicking right now, and coming up with ideas all the time. And the other one is, it talks about councillors. Where I look at the councillors saying they've got this option, but the councillors are saying it's the state government who's putting the pressure on all the time. That if they don't agree to these things, then they might remove them. Do you think that's a fact?
Well, the government has instituted, as I said before, a planning system which has taken a huge amount of power away from local councils because it's developed state-controlled zones. Councils can't develop their own zones. The government develops them. The councils can apply them, but they can only apply them, as we've seen, subject to government approval. at the moment these councils are going through this process, they've got to convince the advisory committee and they have to convince the government to bring in whatever they think. So if they think that they're going to zone 80% of the area to protect their backyards, then they're going to be wrong, because it's not going to happen. And already the signs have come back on the government. Matthew guy won't say, oh, I've dropped it to 57%, you know. He's not going to say that, he's too clever. But he's thrown it out there in a subtle way, saying, if you think you're going to get 80 or 85%, forget it. So that's why councils are looking around for residential growth zones. That's why I put that map up, right? So this council is, like many others, trying to convince the government to bring their application of the zones in over most of the area. They're giving up this and that. You know, Boorandarra is giving up significant areas of pre-Second World War housing. Residential growth is something here. Because they're frightened that if they don't, the whole lot will be thrown out. So the government controls the whole process.
So there's really not a process. That's what I'm saying. It's really that they're really told if you don't do this, there's no real consultation.
Well, there isn't, because the government brought in, for example, this commercial zone in the middle of last year with no consultation whatsoever. It's just applied it. And those commercial zones over all the old traditional strip centres, they're beautiful Victorian centres. There's no height controls. They're mixed use of accommodation, retailing and commercial uses, and already they're lining up in places like Smith Street, Brunswick Street, Swan Street, lining up. Right? So that's all in the government under that. Councils had no right to comment. The government Matthew brought them in overnight. He shifted 5 business zones into 2 commercial zones, and by the way, one of the other consequences was he allowed as of right out of centre big box retailing to occur way away from those centres, right? You don't even need a permit for a lot of them. And that's going to kill what's left of centre. So back to the first part of your question. Look, I believe in the backyard as well. I don't think we need to be, only to the point that I don't think we need to be pulling down our high quality residential area. I think it's just crazy to be doing that. That's not to say there aren't parts of them that are able to be redeveloped through a process if people are involved. But I think what's critical, as I said before, is amenity and heritage. If we destroy our heritage, pre-war housing, for example, we're crazy, I'll avoid explaining why. There is an argument that if you have a diversity of housing in the right places, you're going to cater for diversity of interest. I think that's true. But we're not getting that diversity of housing at the moment. We're getting tiny 2-bedroom and 1-bedroom apartments, right? In the centre of Melbourne, 58 square metre 2-bedroom apartments and down to 35 square metre 1-bedroom apartments. Now that's not catering for a diversity of families and people, right? So I don't think there's anything necessarily wrong with meeting this well. I think it's a good thing, so long as it's in the right place and so long as it's properly designed and is catering for that diverse interest.
Joe, I've got a question for Michael. I just want to have a word with everyone before they break up about questions on the website. So I'll let everyone go who's got questions for Michael before we break up and say a few words.
Yes, sure.
My name's Sheila Newman. In 2002, I wrote a research thesis called Growth Lobby and Its Absence in Australia and France, comparing the 2 different systems. And the thesis was exactly what you were describing, the focus benefits and the costs spread out to the community. And what I've noticed is since 2002, before, because I started looking at the problem years before that, the universities have become less and less capable of studying any alternative to what the government is proposing. And it seems to me that not only has big business got into Parliament, in fact, and the political parties are largely land-speculation parties, particularly the Labor Party, which I know well from looking at its holdings and so on, but they've also got into the universities, and because of the privatisation of the universities or of their interests, people, even in sociology, are practically unable as students to get funding and scholarships to give any other point of view. And also, we only look at Anglophone systems. We don't look at the Napoleonic systems. Because the gentleman over there who said, if you look at the countries at the top of the list with the biggest populations, they're the most unpleasant ones. What you can also see is that they're the most undemocratic ones, and the two go together, and there's a cause and effect that keeps crossing over. I just wanted to say that. I guess I could make it a question. Have you noticed in your university, I'm assuming you have tenure actually, or you're really good at your job, but have you noticed that nobody dares to speak out, nobody gets paid for it? You must get students who are critical and yet never rise above the undergraduate front.
The question was, these pressures are spreading to universities because of the sort of increasing private pressures on university research cultures and grant procedures. We had a book launch during the week from a well-known RMIT academic, Mike Berry, who some of you will know, very well-known housing researcher, and he commented on this book launch that how he retired. He had to retire. He was an emeritus professor now. He had to retire before he could write this book. So we're looking at John Kenneth Galbraith's work from the 50s, the Affluent Society, and it was actually applying it to now. Very interesting thing. But he made that point that, look, he had to get out of it. He had to get out of a full-time job to actually write what he wanted to. You don't get funded for that type of thing anymore in universities. You probably never did. We had, when Bob and I started our careers, I guess we had time. I don't know, there was a way to do it. The pressures are on getting research grants, Category 1 or Category 2 research grants. You've got to bring the money in, you feel you have to, you do a whole series of projects, not many people do. But there are exceptions. I think Bob Bill's shown how it can be done. He set up a group, or Bob's group's done wonderful work. RMIT, we've tried now for 14 years to do this kind of research by funding it. We've had ways of doing it. And I think other universities have had a bash. But you do get the opposite. You get the Grattan Institute, for example, which is, much more free market oriented, strong free market economist approach, which tends to reinforce conventional approaches, not in all ways. And I think it's a mixed story. I think there are academics who are trying and are producing stuff, but it is true, the pressures are on universities just to go on churning out, material for referee journals and so on, but not to get into the social issues like this. It's a mixed story.
All right, let's take two more questions because I think we need to move on to other things, although there will be other opportunities to comment before the meeting closes. I'll take the one on my right here.
So with the Melbourne population increase...
Oh, sorry, name?
Oh, Diane. With the Melbourne population increasing, is the only way to deal with this population increase and find houses for these people to increase our density within our inner suburbs in order to save our green belt and reduce sprawl, or is there another option, and can we do this without high rises?
Okay, so can we find ways to accommodate the increased population to increase density as alternatives to say high rise? I guess that's what I'm saying. Even if you just look at the government's own projections, there's an enormous amount of land to cater for an increased population if we want to go that way, if governments decide to go that way. I agree with the gentleman here that we shouldn't be doing it, but if it comes to that, there are ways of doing it without pulling down our high heritage suburbs and strip centres where they're going to be pulled down, or significant parts of them are now, because it's the easiest way. Absolutely. I mean, there's also, and we don't need to build high-rise to get increased density. We can identify these areas of land, and they range from small to very large sites. And we can do what other cities have done, brought in medium density development, 3-storey walk-up, 4-storey attached, mixed apartment, and so on. I mean, East Perth have done this. I think they've done it very well. Subiaco. We started to do it in Melbourne. Lynch's Bridge, for example, is an example of that. It's 25 to 35 lots per hectare, which is higher than even the Victorian Melbourne, it's about 25 watts per hectare, have repeated that type of density. Right? You can see this at Ringwood Bridge today, and it's kept going even into the new estates along the Maribyrnong. Development's gone up to about 40 watts per hectare there, 45, sometimes 50 watts per hectare. But it's mixed housing, it's not high rise, there's a very limited amount of medium rise, 6 or 7 stories, but mainly 2 stories, 1 story, some 3 story, etc. housing. That's quite dense. So we can do this. But it takes a thing that we've forgotten as a government, as a community, and I don't know, we have, but governments have, and that's planning. You have to identify the land that's there. You have to look at the relationship between the land and the transport pattern, the servicing costs and the requirements, and the kind of amenity outcomes that you want. So yes, absolutely it can be done. We don't have to pull down the best of what we have. At the moment, what we're doing is we're taking the worst of Asian cities and the outer suburbs of the United States and applying it to us. We should be taking the best of European cities. And we're not doing that. Why not?
Building on what you already said, and we've seen various plans, Melbourne 2030, Melbourne at 5 million, now this one, Plan Melbourne, and all of them promise to protect the residential areas, and each one of them weakens the protection over those residential areas, and we see them getting progressively destroyed. And I really believe there's, and I would like to comment on this, that we really can't put in controls to protect these areas while we're growing the population at the rate we are. We're looking at accommodating 1,500 people a week in Melbourne now, and the government is making promises to the housing industry, which I've heard through discussions that I've attended for various superannuation funds, that this rate of growth in population is going to continue on into the foreseeable future, the next 20 years. What sort of city are we really planning to build? What you say. And I also want to say, having been a councillor or a Bayside council for many years, councils have absolutely no control on this. Councils only have the ability to approve development. They can't refuse it, they're overturned in the VCAT, and they cannot get planning scheme amendments through to protect their area unless the minister says so. We live in a planning dictatorship run out of the minister's office, and the only way we can get it changed is to get it through the minister's office. So how do we protect our residential areas or protect the shape of Melbourne without them turning into disastrous Asian cities we know about, and keep growing our population? I really think this brings us to the nub of where the political point must be made about population growth, and we're going to have to address this thing.
I guess that's the theme of what we've been talking about this afternoon, and looking at ways.
Well, are there any protections with
Yes. Look, a couple of quick points. I think we've got to be really careful about projections forward of so-called housing deficits and so on. We have to be very careful. The National Housing Supply Council is very good at this, coming out with scare campaigns about how, we're 200,000 houses shortfall, we've got to build more houses, and we don't, catastrophe is going to happen. When you actually analyse those figures, I don't disagree with the fundamental point that that's how it began. I agree. If the population is going to increase, ultimately it is going to be a problem. We've got to find a way to accommodate it. I prefer we didn't do it, because it happened. But at the moment there's been a big scare campaign going on that we need more land, we need more housing. And when you actually analyse those figures, the National Housing Supply Council had all sorts of assumptions in that were false. For example, a whole lot of people who were never going to, at least in the short term, didn't want to buy houses. And often weren't interested in renting houses. They were building into their numbers a bias that the development industry loved, because the development industry then used those figures and went to the government and said, you've got to rezone more land on the fringe of Melbourne, right, for low income earners, or you've got to build more high-rise in the CBD. When You could build high-rise all through the CBD until there's no land left. You're not going to reduce the spread of Melbourne by a centimetre. They're different markets. So it has completely ignored the complexities of market types, of housing type related to markets, and it built in a whole lot of biases in favour of development. It was used by the government as a steer campaign. Tony Abbott got rid of it, and it's the only thing I think I agree with Tony Abbott on, that he got rid of that, and I think good riddance. On your broader point, that's the debate that we've been having a bit about now for an hour, and that's the debate that's got to be had at a state level. You are absolutely right about local councils, and I think there are ways of accommodating a significant increase in population in Melbourne, but there are riders to it. You've got to identify the land, you've got to match the development types of land, and you've got to match it to infrastructure, and you've got to make the beneficiaries of the development pay for the infrastructure. There's all sorts of things you've got to do. You can do them. Whether we want to do them is another matter. I prefer not to. I love Melbourne with $1.5 million. That city I put up. No, I love that city. It's gone. I noticed that Jay Weatherall, the Premier of South Australia, won the last election by arguing that what was absolutely necessary in Adelaide was that Adelaide of $1.5 million people was the most livable sized city in Australia, and that the way to go was to increase infrastructure benefits to the existing population. That's how he won that election. Right? And he was unashamed. He said, a city of $1 million, by the way, there's a lot of evidence that a city of $1.5 million is the optimal size. Right? And so Weatherall went out and said, look, this is nonsense. What we've got to do is understand that Adelaide is a terrific size for a city. What we've got to do is improve the infrastructure, encourage innovation, entrepreneurial investment, all the rest of it, what we've been talking about, right? But we're going to lose if we're not careful. If we pull down that land, he was arguing for increased protection of amenity and investment in infrastructure. That's what we've been talking about. You know, we could have got in over here and we could have talked to this with Kelvin. You know, Kelvin does this. So that's where I think we've got to go. So we have to get that debate into federal parliament, and we have to get it into the state government. Right?
They don't understand it.
They don't understand it, but we've got to make them understand it. And I guess the positive part of what I'm saying is residents did have an impact on the new zones. I'll finish with this. Residents did have an impact on the new zones. I was incredibly cynical and critical of all this going and making talks about, you know, everything we said. Local council being monstered, communities are being monstered by this, you know, Spring Street imposition of zones. And resident groups got in and they influenced it. And it wasn't just, you know, the Melbourne-based resident groups. It was Green Ledge groups, Rotary West is the other day. And there was local councils had a real bash, and they actually drew the original intent of those zones, which were written as a little hit job in the state government minister's office, Matthew Guy's office, ignoring the public process, and they wrote this little hit job in the minister's office, and then threw the public process in the bin. And it's just the most cynical, outrageous approach, you know, which was, you know, everything we said about local councils. And people arced up and they got the neighbourhood residential zone. The original idea was to merge business, you know, commercial, retailing, and residential as much as possible, as much as they could get away with. So you'd have commercial and all sorts of retailing and other commercial zones in residential areas as of right without the need for permit. You wouldn't need to be notified. Now they were beaten back significantly on that. The general residential zone, for example, was going to have as of right commercial uses in residential zones. It's never been done in Australia. And that was lost. Right? And the green wedge areas were going to be opened up for massive commercial development, and the minister actually put up the wrong zone the week before, showing that, you know, new commercial development was going to be put into the green wedge areas, and he put up the wrong zone, and, you know, they had a heart attack and they pulled them down, put the right zones up, and the councils in the green wedge groups actually had a big victory there. So, look, we can influence these things, and we have to. I'm totally convinced that the answer is in community action. There's a group called the Better Cities Network, the Better Planning Network in in Sydney, which actually stopped the New South Wales state legislation, the equivalent of what Matthew Guy's just got through on the Queensland, stopped it in the upper house, got the numbers, and amended it so radically that the Minister for Planning stood up in the lower house and frothed at the mouth for 45 minutes that his legislation was being beaten by community groups. How outrageous is that? So don't give up. There's a big battle before here, and good luck to you all.
Splendidly inspirational finishing note. I want to thank everyone for their contributions, which were really interesting and worthwhile. I apologise to some who we didn't get to, but I do intend to have more time for people to raise issues before we conclude, so I haven't forgotten you. But I do in particular want to thank you, Professor Buxton, for coming along this afternoon and giving up your time to give us the benefit of your considerable wisdom and expertise. So thank you very much. Michael has told me that he wishes to visit someone who is having their 80th birthday today. I noticed that his initial slide was Melbourne in 1934, which is the year in which that person was born. I know this because my mum, who's about to turn 80 in 3 weeks, she pointed out that that was the year in which she was born. So we will excuse Professor Buxton presently to get away and attend to that important task. There are a number of people who've come in following my opening of the meeting. So for those people, tea and coffee are out.